advising, and they took it to the next level. They saw their graduation rates go up, but it's not enough. I'm so glad that Alana came up here and gave her perspective. We got a lot of work to do. It's not just looking at individual targets. There are sons and daughters, tias and tios. There are folks who really came to this campus, your individual campuses, to get their degree. And they expected to get that degree. And just think, if we had been more strategic and more innovative and been data rich and information rich, we could have probably helped them achieve greater than they thought they were going to achieve. And that's what this grad initiative is about. That's what the next 90 minutes are about. So I need you to sit back and relax, other than if you're tweeting about this piece, and really embrace. We have invited some of the nation's best and brightest to challenge us during the next 90 minutes, to challenge our thoughts around our data, how we engage students, and who our students are, and not just who they are, but whose they are. And that we have a stewardship and a responsibility to take care of them with our level best and some of our brightest thinking around these issues. So you didn't come to hear me, you came to hear these three outstanding speakers, and I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker. I've been joking with this man for the last hour or more. I feel like I know him. This is Dr. Will Del Pilar. He's coming to us as the Vice President of Higher Education at the Education Trust. Dr. Del Pilar.
Good afternoon. My name is Will Del Pilar. I grew up 9 miles away from here in Carson, California. All right slide. I am the oldest son of Wilfredo and Lillian Del Pilar. My father was born in Puerto Rico, and my mother was born in New York to Puerto Rican parents. I am one of 5 children, raised in a bilingual household, to a father who took some college courses as an adult, and a mother who was a graduate of Carson High School. My father was a Protestant minister in Gardena until he retired, and my mother worked alongside him in the church. We moved frequently growing up, and I can recall changing schools 7 times. When my parents enrolled me in high school, the guidance counselor, who had also been my mom's guidance counselor, enrolled me as a teacher's aide in 3 classes in a 6-period day. My parents were not engaged in my education, and while my father had and still has a love for reading, there existed a trust from parents and communities that schools would make the right educational choices for students. In my case, the decision my counselor made was that I didn't need to enroll in college prep courses because I wasn't college material. I was supposed to get a job after graduation. As a result, I was placed in courses that failed to challenge me. I did not take the SAT, nor did I ever engage in a conversation about test prep, the FAFSA, or college options. High school graduation was the goal. I made it to graduation, and not surprisingly, I didn't enroll in college immediately following high school. I worked full-time and began doing research on colleges. I bought an SAT prep book. I applied to colleges and completed the FAFSA on my own. The first time I visited a college campus was when I moved into the dorms, and thanks to the support of family and friends and mentors, I was able to be the first person in my family to graduate from college. Years later, I was the first person in my family to graduate with a master's degree from Cal State Dominguez Hills. And finally, I was the first person in my family to graduate with a PhD. I share this story because I am the student Executive Order 1110 was enacted to benefit. I am a first-generation student. I am Latino. I was low income. I received a Pell Grant. I tested into remedial math and English. I shouldn't have made it. I survived my education. Today's students shouldn't have to survive education. They should thrive in education. And I hope in my time here today to share a bit about completion gaps nationally for Black and Latino students, to briefly discuss why this is important, and to share some examples of practices and policies that are helping to close completion gaps. This isn't working. I've been clicking it, guys. You missed the slide of my high school graduation. Oh, 2 slides. Next slide. That's my high school graduation, my 2 favorite aunts. Next slide. So nationally, where are we? Is this working? Okay. There are two things that we've learned from years of studying college completion. Income matters and race matters. Young adults from high-income families are 4 times more likely to earn a bachelor's degree than students from the lowest income quartile. Think of it this way. 100 low-income students start college, and after 6 years, 15 of those students have earned degrees. 100 students from the highest income quartile enroll in college, and 6 years later, 60 have earned a degree. Income matters. Next slide. The other factor in graduation is race and ethnicity. When we look at 6-year graduation rates, the disparities are telling. Over 63% of white students graduate from college at 4-year institutions in 6 years. Compare that to 39% of black students, a difference of 23 percentage points. Latino students have made progress over the past several years, but we still see gaps of 10 percentage points. I'll use my example of the 100 students here to illustrate. 100 white students start college, and after 6 years, 37 leave college without a degree. 100 Latino students start college, and after 6 years, 47 leave college without a degree. 100 black students start college, and after 6 years, 61 leave college without a degree. We must do better by our students. Next slide. What we've become great at is creating students with some college and no degree. Think about this. There are over 7,600,000 people in California with some college, no degree. These people probably have debt and are not benefiting from the advantages a degree offers. This is more people than the population of these 38 states individually. 29% of California residents have some college credit and no degree. Next slide. We can do better. We must do better. And what might success look like? Next slide. Here's what happens if CSU does nothing. There are over 64,000 new students enrolled in the fall of 2015. Approximately 79% come back for their second year, and after 6 years, 57% or 36,000 students earn degrees. The model to my left is what's being proposed. The same 64,000 students enroll, but we retain 7,000 more students into the second year. And after 6 years, we award 9,000 more degrees. Next slide. We've seen models nationally that are working, including using multiple measures of assessment. According to research by Judith Scott Clayton, the use of multiple measures can reduce misplacements in remedial education by up to 15%. Multiple measure models vary but can include high school GPA, the use of high school curriculum, and the standardized assessment to place students in math and English courses. Currently, there are 7 states using multiple measures, the 5 states and 2 that I will highlight. The North Carolina Community College system implemented a multiple measures model which required a GPA of 2.6 and 4 years of high school math. The results are encouraging. 68% of students using the alternative placement passed a math gateway course compared to 48% of students who took the placement test, an increase of 17 percentage points. Massachusetts implemented developmental math GPA pilots, and they had 2 different pilots based on GPA, 2.7 and above and a 2.4 to 2.69. They had very different results with these 2 different pilots. The students who were admitted using pilot A actually completed between 10 and 17 percentage points higher than the students in pilot B. And so we see that GPA is a good predictor in terms of passing a gateway course in college. Next slide. And additionally, we are seeing that sequence matters, and students may get better results if they take credit-bearing courses alongside a remedial course or with extra support. At the community college system in West Virginia, 37% of students who took a remedial English course went on to complete the Gateway course. Students who took a co-requisite English course completed at 68%. For math, 14% of students who completed a remedial course went on to complete a Gateway course, compared to 62% of students who successfully took and passed a co-requisite math course. In Tennessee, we see students enrolling in community college with an ACT score of 13 who are completing a Gateway math course at 2.7%. Students taking a co-requisite math course completed at 58%, an increase of over 50 percentage points. Additionally, we see adult and minority students experience a five-fold increase in their math success rates. Florida, they implemented a statewide model, and they had mixed results. The co-requisite model resulted in a higher percentage of students not passing the course they enrolled in. But the share of students passing Gateway courses increased, and they saw decreases in racial ethnic gaps. And so the models have pointed in different directions, but we're seeing success in these models nationally. Next slide. At EdTrust, we hope through our research and advocacy to support work that expands excellence and equity in education from preschool through college, builds and engages diverse communities that care about education equity, and increases political and public will to act on equity issues, and to increase college access and completion, particularly for historically underserved populations. Next slide. And through our research, we have found that while completion gaps are persistent, they are not impossible to address, and we have identified colleges that are closing these gaps. In our recent publication, Black Student Success, we have identified institutions with no gaps between black and white students. George Mason University, University of California, Riverside, and Middle Tennessee State have no gaps between black and white students. In an upcoming report, we identify institutions closing the gap between Latino and white students. The University of North Carolina, Wilmington has no gaps between white and Latino students. And at the University of San Francisco, Latino students graduate at higher rates than white students. Gaps can be closed, and what institutional leaders do matters. Next slide. We also see an impact in practice, and there was a video, I'm not going to show it because they already gave me the sign. But it was highlighting some of the work that we've learned from our practice work, from our colleagues from Fresno State, from our colleagues from Cal State Fullerton, who are using data and student success teams to impact student outcomes. And what we've seen from student success teams is that these teams are increasing retention and completion for students. We've seen institutions nationally implement modified versions. Morgan State are calling them graduation coaches. The University of Memphis is using data in creative ways to try and identify gaps and practices that can increase student success. So we know that it's possible, and we know that innovation is occurring. Next slide. Next week, in the next month, we're releasing a report at EdTrust West on Latino students. It's called The New Majority. There's over 1 million Latino students in higher education in California. And that represents 35% of the state's higher education student population. And so this is a huge population in California. And so look up for this report coming out later this month. Next slide. There's a saying in higher education, unimpeded by 200 years of progress. Many of the things we do in higher education have not changed despite advances in technology and what we know about learning, despite what we know about student development, despite what we know about student services, despite the fact the students that we serve today are different than the students that we served 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 25 years ago, or even 10 years ago. The old models are not working for today's students. And if we're going to make progress in equitably serving today's students, we need to be bold. We need to change the model. We need to transform practice and teaching to close gaps and make progress. Thank you.
there, sorry. Look, thinking and acting innovatively is something that we've been doing for a while, and Will just sort of talked about places where it's working. The concern that we're having and why the graduation initiative of 2025 is so important is we have got to ensure that it's working for everybody who gets admitted to our universities. And then understanding at the end of that year who didn't make it, why didn't they make it, and beginning to get a lot more intentional about that. We spent 4 hours this morning, some of your best and brightest university leaders from your campuses, and we spent 4 hours just talking about young men of color. Oh, the heads start nodding. Yeah. If we don't take all of Will's data and disaggregate it by gender, we're going to be back here for Graduation Initiative 2050, setting more targets, but doing some of the same things. And we can't afford that. Our students can't afford that. And this is the time. But when you're thinking and acting innovatively, you have to make sure you do it with sound data, sound research, and innovation. And we have one of the best speakers here to talk about that. You know, when you have innovation in your title, there better be some results. So I'd like to introduce you to Bridget Burns, who's the, Bridget, come on out, and Bridget will tell you about what she does.
So thank you so much for having me. Today I'm going to talk to you about innovation, specifically that it's not that intimidating, it doesn't have to be that complicated, and you can totally do this so long as you work together. But first I have to admit that I am the least likely person to be talking about higher education innovation. You see, I grew up in rural Montana. I grew up in poverty, and I was one of those kids who just barely made it to the right side of the tracks, and then I ran like heck. And when I finally got to college, I really thought that if they were going to let me take out thousands of dollars in student loans, that surely the grown-ups would be watching. And they would help make sure that I could make good choices, they register for the right classes. I can hear that you all know where the story goes. So I ended up graduating 7 years later with a bachelor's degree with 50 extra credits that I didn't need and the resulting student loans to show for it. And I had done something I didn't realize, which was to stumble upon a dirty little secret in higher education. And that is that higher education was not actually designed around students. It just wasn't. We haven't had the luxury of intentional design. Most of what we do is reactionary. We have to be everything to everyone, whether it's producing knowledge and discovery and groundbreaking research, economic development, social impact, teaching and learning, safety and security and efficiency and accountability, and it goes on. So ultimately, we haven't had the luxury of design. But the nice thing is we can actually address this. We can address some of the big problems in society once we recognize this. The challenges that we're facing require us to know that this is true. The first challenge that we're facing that really matters is that we're facing a shortfall of college degrees of about 11 million students. We produce college degrees in places where they used to expect them and not necessarily where they do now. People are expecting college degrees for things they didn't used to, and we fail half of all the students who walk in the door. The added complexity to this is that for the first time in US history, low-income students are now the majority of students in public K-12, which means that the students who are going to be coming en masse are going to be predominantly from a background that we don't do very well with. This is historically how we've performed in terms of giving a bachelor's degree. So students who grew up in my background, that bottom line, 6% chance of getting a bachelor's degree in the 1970s. And despite all of our talk about progress and innovation, we've actually made no progress, and we're at 9% now. So this is a really big challenge that we're facing a massive shortfall of college degrees, and the economic competitiveness of our country is at stake. That the students who are going to be coming in large mass are going to be students from a background we historically do a pretty terrible job with. The last piece that really matters is that we need to acknowledge that this system, this higher education system, was perfectly designed to get these results. And when you understand that every system is perfectly designed to get the results they do, then you can actually try and solve the problem. It's a design problem. When you recognize it's a design problem, two things happen. One, you acknowledge that there's actually no bad guy. There's nobody who's twisting their mustache in an ivory tower somewhere. Faculty and staff and administrators and presidents and chancellors, they all deeply care about students and they want to do better. But the second thing that happens when you acknowledge that it's a design problem is that you realize it's a design solution. And we can actually design our way out of this, that we can be creative, and we can make change at scale. But some of the challenges that we face that are more around the design space need to at least be acknowledged. The first is that you, as an administrator or as a faculty member, you have a lane. You know what you are asked to do and what a win would look like, and you know what a loss would look like, right? You know how to get fired. You know how to move ahead. You have a lane. You know when you should communicate with students. But what we rarely acknowledge is that students have to interact with hundreds, if not thousands, of lanes. And that is like crossing lanes of traffic. And we are over-communicating, and we are under-communicating, and there are gaps, and there are booby traps, and there are landmines. And we have to see things from the broader systemic view of how students are interacting with the enterprise. The second thing that we need to see from a systemic view is that this is what the modern higher ed administrator looks like. You recognize yourself? Everyone is incredibly, I know, Tim, right? I know. And don't even get me started on what chancellors' plates look like. Ultimately, we have this really dangerous belief in higher ed that if we just give you more work, that your plate will expand. And it's not working, and most of you can't even get through your inbox at the end of the day. We have to acknowledge and be much more creative about the capacity challenges facing us. We cannot continue to keep hiring back retirees at 0.49 and not acknowledging where there is really work to be done. The other piece that we need to think about is that when administrators have a question and they want to move and they want to innovate and they have a little bit of time, energy, and money, they turn to the higher ed sector, and this is what our culture feels like. This is how universities talk about what they do. Everything we do is not the greatest thing in the world. Sorry. And every institution is not the greatest liberal arts college of the greater Des Moines area, right? So it's problematic that we have this culture that makes it so we only tell about the amazing things and we polish everything up and we don't talk about failure and we don't share what we learned from failure, and therefore we are forcing other people to live our failure, and students are the ones who are paying the price. We have to create and change our culture so that it actually rewards the courage of vulnerability. The last piece is that we actually have to start working together. I know it's super fun to tinker in a silo in the dark, but the reality is that what we actually need to do is work together. So change is hard, it's problematic, it's difficult, but it is so much harder when you do it alone. And this is not just my idea, I'm not just saying this, I hope that you do good work in this space. I've spent the last 4 years working with institutions spanning the United States who have actually been trying to address this. In 2013, the 11 presidents and chancellors of these campuses came together, and they decided, first off, they didn't know each other. None of them they weren't friends with each other, they didn't have any relationships, there wasn't any money. So when we first came together, people rolled their eyes. And for good reason. It was yet another initiative to be announced, because that's what we're good at in higher ed, is announcing initiatives, but not necessarily following through with them. So these presidents and chancellors decided they wanted to unite around a sense of urgency, that we were not producing enough college degrees, that we were doing a pretty terrible job when it came to low-income students, first-generation students, and students of color. And going it alone to address those two problems was a massive waste of time, energy, and money. And we knew that students were the ones paying the price. So these campuses have been working together to innovate, scale up what works, and share what we've learned. They are 400,000 students, 120,000 low-income students. And over the past few years, we've actually been able to do some stuff. When we first came forward, we set a public goal. It was a stretch goal beyond all current and stretch capacity. We were going to graduate an additional 68,000 students. At least half were going to be low income. When we submitted this goal to the White House for their college summit, they didn't believe us. They made me prove that the data was actually possible for them to do this. I'm happy to share that since this happened in the last 3 years, we're now on track to produce 94,000 additional degrees in that time period. And that's that's all the campuses. I literally do not educate a single person. But what's even more promising, remember 120,000 low-income students. In 3 years, our campuses have increased their number of low-income degrees by 25%. So change is entirely possible, and you can totally do this. We've figured some things out. It's not perfect, and I hope that some of what we've learned can be helpful to you as you think about how you innovate together and you move faster together. So some of the lessons that we learned is that first you need to form a team. I know this seems really simple, but it was actually a pretty radical thing at the time. If you have a committee, that is not what I'm talking about. Any committee that exists for more than 3 years should be disbanded, and having a meeting is not an outcome. So I'll just let that. So these campuses, these teams are formed, and they are specifically focused on eliminating the delta in outcomes across race and income on our campuses. They change by the project. So sometimes IR will be on there. Sometimes financial aid will be on there. It depends. It has to evolve. And it was something that was formed by the presidents and chancellors, and they are accountable specifically for data. More importantly, we were creative about that capacity problem. We created a fellowship. These are our fellows. They are early to mid-career smart thinkers and doers who most of them represent the backgrounds of the students that we're talking to. They are many PhDs, but they don't want to be faculty. They want to work on change. They are specifically being trained in change management and shepherding innovation in a complex bureaucracy, a skill set that we know the future leaders of higher ed desperately need. So this is how the committees are then staffed by these teams, these fellows who then work with each other. The next piece is that every one of our initiatives is not just spaghetti thrown at the wall, it's actually connected. And in fact, many of them are stress testing prior year's interventions. In the last 3 years, these are our scale projects we've done. And if I had gone to school at an institution with predictive analytics, they would have known that I was registering for the wrong classes. If I'd gone to a school with proactive advising, they would have sat me down before I realized there was a problem. And financial interventions would have certainly helped. But for my campuses, you could not do proactive advising if you didn't actually implement predictive analytics. It's too easy to say that you're doing something. Our campuses actually help hold each other accountable. The last is that I want to make sure this helps and is relatable for you no matter what. When we were first formed and we were trying to figure out how to do this work, I looked everywhere. I looked at Carnegie's Improvement Science, I looked at Design School, I looked at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, I looked all over. And while I want to tell you that the best ideas came from really fancy and pedigreed places, the truth is I was really inspired by things outside of higher ed, and I would encourage you to be as well. One of the things that inspired me, Weight Watchers. It's a very simple thing, but it is one of the most effective communities of practice for improvement I've ever seen. You have to sign up for Weight Watchers and decide you're going to be in. You're going to every week weigh yourself. There's data sharing and transparency, and it's objective. And when you make progress, they praise you. They don't shame you if you don't make progress. But the most important thing is they create a community of practice where people talk about the things they're struggling with, and they help each other get better. So sometimes it doesn't need to be the fanciest idea in the world. You can actually get inspired by all kinds of places outside of the academy. The last is when people ask me what it's like to be in the Alliance. This is what it's like. So first, we convene our campuses with dynamic convenings where there are no keynotes, there are no panels, no presidents or chancellors or provosts. It is teams only and 7-minute talks and failure sharing sessions, and it's more like a workshop. But when we do that, people share hard things. So this was when Georgia State shared a really hard thing they'd gone through, which inspired one of our campuses. So we got our fellows trained in the method they talked about, which was process mapping. A very simple thing, not that innovative, but we're applying it in a special way. And so down here is where Michigan State applied process mapping, where they wanted to map out the number of emails and messages they were sending to students from the time they get admitted to the day they showed up. And they found that they were emailing 450 times in a 3-month window of time, and every one of your campuses is probably doing this too. And they found that there were 50 types of holds that a student could have on their account that they didn't know about before they got there. Every one of your campuses is likely doing this too. Very simple technique, process mapping, not that fancy and innovative, and yet it's transforming what's going on at Michigan State, and it's helping them to serve their students better. So ultimately, I just want you to know that innovation is totally possible. You can totally do this. And you can find friends and allies who are clearly in this audience today to be able to make a difference for students who are just like me and make it so that we can finally close the achievement gap. Thank you.
Going home. I've been dancing on my own. As long as you're looking, I don't feel alone.
Was that not impressive? Yeah, that was impressive. And what made it even more impressive is sometimes your story, embracing who you are and where you come from and how you got here, her passion is tied to her story. And many of you have stories too. Remember when you were 18 to 24? I know. What you may not know in the system is that the system is the youngest it's ever been. Over 70% of our students are between 18 and 24. And we're one of the most ethnically diverse, academically diverse, socio-demographically diverse systems in the nation. You all, as California goes, so goes the nation. We've got to get this right. We've got to have some innovative things like that we're talking about that has moved the needle in a Northern California campus, and a Southern California campus is about to adopt it. The consortiums that we build have to, because this is we're family. So if it's not working in a Northern California campus, but it's working in a Southern California campus, these are all of our students in California. So that diversity has always been our point of pride, and we've always relished in it. But now when you look at California demographically, over the last 10 years, things have shifted. There's a phenomenal report that was done by the Chancellor's Office, and I'm sure most of you read it and memorized it. It was called Undergraduate Outcomes Report. And it looked at 2004, and then it did a snapshot in 2014. Demographically, who are our first-time, full-time freshmen? Who are our transfer students? How Pell eligible are they? And as California goes, so goes the nation. At this point, 21 of our 23 CSUs are federally designated as Hispanic serving institutions. Federally designated. I mean, if you have 25% or more, you get a federal designation. 21 out of the 23. Do the math. That means that we've gone from being Hispanic serving institutions, we're a Hispanic serving system. We got some work to do. Over 2/3 of the bachelor's degrees that are awarded in California are awarded to Latinos and Latinas, and guess where they come from? CSU. So we have a lot of work to do, and the next speaker I'm about to introduce you to is someone whose career I've followed for years. She's been my friend in my head, but several years ago we really connected. She's that good. She's really that good, and she co-founded Excelencia in Education. Co-founded it. So she built something from the ground up. And if you just log on to their website, they have their finger on the pulse of what works for Hispanic students nationally, and certainly for what works for them here in California. I'm excited to introduce to some and present to others Dr. Deborah Santiago.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing so far? Good. It's very bright up here, so I hope for those who are watching in video, you're not seeing me squint, but I'm going to fake it till I make it there. So I want to start by telling you a story. There were 3 mothers who were at their son's high school graduation. One mother was proud to say, "My son's going to a community college. We were not sure he was going to go, that he was going to make it, that he was even going to graduate. But we're so proud that he is going forward." The other 2 mothers were happy for her and said such. The second mother said, "My son has been working really hard. He's going to a 4-year institution. We're proud of him. He's getting a scholarship. He's going to go all the way. We're really proud of the work he's done." Again, the other 2 mothers very proud and complimentary for her. The third mother says, very humbly, "My son is going to jail." And the other 2 mothers were kind of surprised. They didn't know what to say. It's a high school graduation. It didn't resonate. How was that possible? He said, "Jess, he worked very hard, and we're very proud of him. He's the first in the family." And again, the mothers were shocked. What is she saying? And they timidly said, "Where is he going?" "To be in jail." She says, "Well, Connecticut." And the mothers says, "Are you proud of him?" "Jess, we're very proud of him." And they said, "Oh, you mean Yale?" She said, "Jess, I mean jail." the reason I raise that is because I'm not here to tell you the most innovation. You can check out our website, you can check out Bridget's, you can check out others. I don't presume to tell people who've been doing this all their lives better than you know what innovation is. I've seen lots of really good reports and good work. We have a whole set of evidence-based practices that we're happy to share with you. But I work in DC, and I forgot to give my clicker to tell you the next slide. So you're going to see these two slides. Can you give me the slides? I got straight into the story. That's not the slide. There we go. Jail and Yale. But the reason I say this to you is because framework matters. And you all who are practitioners, who are leaders, who are making a difference in California and in the country, know that at the national level we're paying attention. But at the national level, it's all about scale. And when you're talking scale, you lose the face of that individual student. Because, we're all about rounding errors. Our issues come in hundreds of thousands, if not millions. Millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of students. Rounding errors. And those are people. Those are individuals. These are students. This is potential. And how we think about framing the story, framing the work matters. It creates the space for the opportunity that needs to happen. It creates the opportunity for resources. And that's really hard in an environment where we're all in, where at the end of the day, we have initiative fatigue. How many people here have initiative fatigue? Just tired of one more initiative. But not if it's the right initiative and the right effort and people are bought in. Not if we frame it as an opportunity. I'll tell you, as was shared earlier, I have the good fortune of starting an organization called Excelencia in Education. And, but I come from a small island called Puerto Rico, 100 by 30. And here's an example of framing. I worked in the U.S. Department of Education, and I would do training. I am, able to do that. I'm not there anymore. And I cannot tell you how many people would come up and ask me, what kind of currency do you use in Puerto Rico? Do we need our passports? And given the situation now, as horrible as the situation is right now in Puerto Rico, the opportunity to educate people so that they learn Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens at birth, that there are more Puerto Ricans on the mainland than on the island, that you've got something like the Jones Act that creates challenges economically and otherwise. Even in the horrible situation we're in with Maria, creates an opportunity to frame action and compel action. And that's where I focus my energy, because I'm also not working directly with students. But I found there was an opportunity that I couldn't let go. And I'm going to say this is what I do. So if I had to put it in one phrase, my job is ignorance abatement, right? Ignorance is not knowing. And unfortunately, a lot of people think they know the situation of Latinos and our post-traditional students. But they don't really know. Now, ignorance you can do something about. You all are educators, that's what we do for a living, right? Stupidity you can't do a lot about. But ignorance you can do something about. And that's a large part of what we need to focus our energy on. And that's why I'm talking about the framing part. Because you've got to get people to engage with you and see the framing and see themselves in it. So at Excelencia, we talk about Latinos. That's not to the exclusion of others. But what we found is that often the profile of Latinos is very deficit-based overall, right? We were all high school dropouts, English language learners, undocumented immigrants. And we're still more likely to be that than other groups. But the reality is that is not an accurate profile of our students. And so I do what I like to say is that, I'm trilingual. I speak 3 languages, Spanish, English, and data, right? And the reason I say that is because to create framing and to work at a national level, it's not just enough to tell a powerful student story. It's important. But you have to use data as well. That's the language of policy. That's the language of framing an issue and getting people engaged. Ultimately, our work is not just about Latinos. To us, they're the bellwether They're representative of the post-traditional students that we need to be thinking about. That's a reframing in and of itself, right? This idea that we're serving that 18-year-old that goes straight from high school to college, 11 campuses, college ready, and finishes in 4 years. That's not the majority of our students today. And we have to reframe it and engage people with that in order to get them to act. Otherwise, we just get put into those same boxes. And you've got a powerful story of what you're trying to do with this initiative and what the Cal State system and your individual institutions and your faculty and your presidents are doing that doesn't get heard at that level because we have to take time to frame it in a way. So I kind of jokingly put up there, you know, this translator. There's data, it's translation. Unfortunately, the onus is on us to translate to those audiences in a manner that they can relate and understand what we're doing. Would that were not the case. That would be great. But we've got to create the space to inform and compel action. That onus is ultimately on us. And that's not always a great thing, but, you know, I'd rather take the mic than not. I don't want somebody else determining what that framing is for the students I care about. And that's why I'm focusing on the framing part of this conversation as opposed to innovation, because that's an opportunity we have directly in front of us. And you've got good data. Data will take you so far. You've got interesting practices that's innovative. You know, I was thinking about innovation. I said, what can I tell the colleagues at CSU about innovation? One thing that I've been talking a lot about with people is that, you know, sometimes it's innovative to take the things we know work in our pilot approaches and take it to the students that historically have not been served. That's innovative, right? It's not that we found a new silver bullet. And even, you know, why such a dead, macabre thing to say silver bullets? But in D.C., that's how we talk. It's about sausage making, and it's about silver bullets. It's all about that quick and dirty thing. And that's framing the story for action. And we just have to think about that when we're focused on the efforts and strategies that we're trying to do. So when I talk about this work, oops, I have to point this way, see if that'll work there. At Excelencia, we believe good policy is informed by good practice, not the other way around. We deal with a lot of people who believe that you just create it up top and you force it down. And you all are part of a system, and I imagine the things that I've seen that are working at your initiative are not because they were mandated from on high, but that they came from somewhere and you're trying to be scaled up. That's what we try to do at the national level. And it's important. We have to stay connected to the practitioners and the institutions in order to do that. Heaven forbid we should presume that we know more, because we don't. We'd be just like the people in D.C. who believe that their experience is the experience. Because everybody in D.C. has a college education, so they're all experts in education, right? And their reality is not the norm. And that's part of the framing the story to compel action. And the onus is on us to do that. That's a bland frame, sexy frame. So when I often talk about this, what I get, and I just, you know, I took the TED Talk thing seriously, so no number, just a whole bunch of pictures, right? We often get this issue like, you need to focus. We get the eye roll. We get people who just are saying, you know, no way, or pleading for change, or people that just get angry, or go about their work very quietly. However you do it, the important point is not to stop. Figuring out how do you align your framing of what you care about with the action that needs to happen. And then, of course, how do you enumerate how much it's going to cost and make sure that you're proving yourself accountable for the public funds and the students you fundamentally care about? I don't really question that with you guys. You know, I think a lot of people do, but they don't know the story, and they don't know the framing. And that's what we do at Excelencia, but that's really, I think, fundamentally what matters for all of us. How do we frame not just the conversation, but how do we create the opportunity in public policy, which is about scale? It's not necessarily legislation. But how do we address this work at scale that makes people feel they are a part of it, that they are included? I've seen lots of really good work that does that. But here's our opportunity to challenge convention. Here's our opportunity to figure out ways to speak 3 languages or more, right? Talking to faculty, talking to administrators or presidents or system heads or elected officials or funders, they all have tweaks in the language that we use. Are we staying true to what we're committed to in this room, in this system, to make sure we're framing the story of success in a powerful way? From that, we can call tons of examples and things that need to happen. But if we don't find the way to frame it so we can bring people on board, then the potential of the good work we're doing will only go so far. And that means we're constantly thinking, how else can we reframe this? How do I bring that other group in, the naysayer? And to be frank, there's some people that you just aren't going to bring on board. And that's going to have to be okay too. But you can't let it stop you from the kind of innovation and framing and the difference making that I am very confident all of you are in this room to do, and that we're committed to help and bring attention to, because our commitment is to tell the stories of others that are busy doing the work and don't have the time to tell their stories overall, so that we can, in our own way, create scale and try to promote more and more good practice that makes a difference. Thank you all very much.
All right. While they're indiscriminately moving furniture, we're going to transition to our next segment, which I think is going to be really huge. I want you all to be able to engage and interact with our three speakers, and I'll invite them back out in a moment. Name it and frame it. I think we have some opportunities to do that. And I think every speaker brought something very unique to this space around their own experience, what they do professionally, but they also brought who they were personally to the space, which is so very important. And as we think about all of the initiatives and things that we're going to do, I challenge every one of you in the room to really look at every committee and every initiative and every event that you have planned and just run it through the lens of how long have we been doing this? And is it getting the kind of results that we want? One of the pillars in the graduation, on our campus, we've just reframed the Graduation Initiative 2025. It has allowed us to have conversations that we've never had before. It's allowed us to uncover data that we've never uncovered before. It's allowed us to complain about things we've never complained about before. It has been a game changer. Now we want to use it to make sure the game is not only fair, but the game is a great success for all the students who are going to come our way. Is that a good place to clap? That's a good place to clap. All right. I'm going to now invite all three of our speakers back out. I think there are some folks who are in the audience with microphones. If you're with us on live stream, be sure to tweet out your questions and all that good stuff. Come on out, Bridget and Deborah and Will. They're coming back to the stage. Let's give them a round of applause, you guys. What a team. What a team. So, where are our microphones? Microphones right there. Microphones on this side. And so we're simply going to allow you as the audience to get to some of those microphones, or the microphones will get to you. Look in the back so you can see where the microphones are. And then we will just proceed into this session. I'm going to try to facilitate it as much as I possibly can, but I'm looking forward to hearing some good questions and some good answers. There we go.
So
I'll break the ice.
We can't see a thing, so
the question
We hear your voice.
we can hear you, but we can't
you.
see you.
No, now we need that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this question is for all three of the panelists. Mike Spagna from Dominguez Hills. So we've been talking a lot about higher education, but I want to turn a little bit and talk about something about interdependence. Government, industry, education sector, all three having to be reliant on each other. Thoughts about that in terms of where higher education can play a more active role. The example I gave you a couple years ago, San Fernando Valley, went out to go visit a sheet metal plant. They told me, well, we get all of our graduates from University of Dayton because they know what we need. Right down the street from Cal State Northridge. So the idea of changing that around to focus more on interdependence. So at the end of the day, whether it's government or it's education or it's industry, everybody goes to bed at night thinking this is our joint responsibility, as opposed to finger pointing and saying, well, it's somebody else's fault. So getting away from the transaction notion, we'll give you more money if you meet this goal, but it's more synergistic than that. So I wanted to get a response from the three of you about the interdependence and your perspectives on that in terms of innovation.
I'll start. I think that before I came to my current position, I was Deputy Secretary for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I worked on the higher ed side, and we were working on our ESSA plan, our ESSA state plan. And there was lots of conversations about college career readiness in K-12. The only problem is they didn't invite anyone from post-secondary. And so this is what happens in this space a lot, is we really isolate ourselves, and we try to solve this problem from a very, I think, single-minded perspective, which is ours. And so I would argue that we're not seeing it between K-12 and post-secondary, and we're also not seeing it between government, industry, and post-secondary education. And I think it's something that we really need to start working across, I think, our difference, instead of continuing to highlight the differences we have between government, workforce, and what we do at the university level.
Yeah. We work with some institutions that are focused on what happens after they cross the stage. And I think that's where our intersectionality is, because the institutions have to be invested in what happens, not just when the student gets that sheepskin, what happens after that. It speaks well for the institution when they're able to make those kinds of links. And so we wrote a piece called Finding Your Workforce, a series, because we kept hearing employers and graduate schools that says, we want more Latinos, we just can't find them, or they're not graduating in our fields. I said, wait a minute. Let me put on my data translator hat. Let me show you the top 25 graduating Latinos from certificate to PhD. If you want to know where they are, it might not be in the same 16 institutions you all recruit from, but they're there. And then the next thing was, what are the institutions doing to help those employers and those graduate schools make sure that those students are getting there? And I think for some institutions, that is hard. They're doing and running as fast as they can to get them to the grad rate. But we are seeing institutions that realize their survival and success is predicated on what they do to make sure their students continue. And those are the institutions that we focus on. So I'm with you.
And I would just say that we need to reframe the conversation. It's far too transactional between employers and institutions. And I have yet to find a single employer that uses a transcript in their hiring process. It's time for us to actually have a conversation about the data and how we represent learning. This needs to, and the people who should be having this conversation are not digital portfolio companies, and it shouldn't be one institution at the time. It should actually be a comprehensive gathering of employers and institution leaders and HR, because too often we bring employers in, but we're not bringing in the HR folks, so they're actually not using any of the stuff that they say they support in the hiring process. And we as institutions need to fundamentally redesign the transition from college to graduation and career. That is a space that even the career services folks are saying. I mean, there was a famous speech that went out that was from career services, which the death of career services, why career services must die. So they are not a resistant field. They actually want to see innovation, and we need to spend some energy on it, because right now it's kind of like, peace, like good luck. And the outcomes are not as effective as we'd like them to be. So I think it's a fundamental reframe, and it's actually a conversation about data and how we represent the learning in the classroom.
Let's take a question in-house from this side, and then we'll go online and get a live stream question from some of our folks out there. Anyone on this side have a question? In the house? In the house?
I have one on this side.
Okay, good.
Hi, everyone. Is this on? Jennifer Summit, San Francisco State. And the last question sort of anticipated my question. I'm in the middle of reading Kathy Davidson's new book called A New Education. I recommend it. I don't know how it's going to end yet. But at the beginning, she's talking about the fact that higher education was designed to prepare students for an industrial world, a manufacturing world, and we're in a different place now. Leading up to my question, which is, I'd like to ask you about majors. Part of Kathy Davidson's argument is that the major was designed in order to help students to specialize at a time when specialization was how manufacturing works. And I want to get and here at CSU, we ask students to commit to a major before they've even come onto campuses. And I think a lot of students find, to their chagrin, but to nobody's surprise, that they've chosen the wrong majors. And that's something that leads to a lot of swirl and confusion. I want to invite you to talk about how students' majors map onto the world that we're preparing them for, or don't. Now, the follow-up bonus question is, what can we do about it? But I'll leave that to you.
Either one of you can start.
I would say that I can start with the latter question, which I think that the D schools work on the fundamental questions of higher ed redesign a few years ago were quite solid, which was that students shouldn't pick a major, they should pick a problem they want to solve. I recommend that to incoming freshmen. I think that what Georgia State's doing, where they created major maps, but they also created meta majors. So the idea that you have an 18-year-old walk in and we say, and we brag, by the way, we brag about the fact that we have 3,000 majors for them to choose from. It's like super adorable. And then we're surprised that they pick the wrong one because we don't even give them information about local workforce and what the actual pay rate for those would be, and then what other careers they immediately adjacent that would be something they also might be interested in. So what they're doing is actually a pretty groundbreaking stuff, and they're partnering with a couple different vendors. I would say just that alone, meta majors. So you are not a political science major. You are just kind of I don't know if we want to use the word liberal arts today because I know it's under attack, picking broader cross sections and letting students choose over the first year, dabble a bit, and then at the end of their freshman year, then they choose a major. But right now, this is a terribly designed situation, and it's a very small fix for us to solve it.
You know, I would agree. I think that for low-income students and students of color, many times your exposure to what's available is very limited. And so it's based on those things which you've seen in your daily life. And so, you know, you could argue that I never saw, as I was growing up, I didn't know anyone who was a doctor. And so my exposure may have only been a nurse or someone who did x-ray tech or those things. And so those were the frame by which I viewed my possible career options. So I get into post-secondary, and I'm going to make those decisions based on maybe what I think is going to help me get a job. And so the exposure needs to happen at a much earlier phase. I would say that as we think about what's happening in the K-12 space, you know, we've done away virtually almost nationally with high school counselors. And so we need to really improve what we're doing in that space. If we're going to train counselors to be in schools, we're going to put counselors in schools, we need to make sure they're exposing students at much earlier phases. If you get to college and that's when you start thinking about what you're going to do in your career, it's probably too late. And so I think that's why we see the swirling. And that was my experience. I went into college. I changed majors 3 times because it was a perception of what I wanted, but not an understanding of what the curriculum looked like to help me get to that place. And so I think we need to start educating students much earlier. And when I was in Pennsylvania, we're talking about starting in the 5th grade, exposing students to different career options. Yeah. And so we need to start earlier, expose them to career, expose them to workforce, and what it looks like to make a living wage in that field. Yeah.
So I would add, you know, back to my framing issue, you know, I think fundamentally the questions we're talking about here is how do we as institutions change our focus from enrolling to really serving? Right. I think that there's a component there about graduation and workability and employability, I think is the new term that we're talking about here, but then also figuring out what we want to do. And I think it's great that we can use CBOs and K-12 and others to do that, but we have an opportunity in higher ed to serve our students, and that's got to be above and beyond the, are they enrolling, are they retaining, are we supporting them financially, and are we graduating them? Those are really important, but serving is more than that, and I do think that it's a significant change to say we are going to wrap around our students with what they need rather than here is our structure, students adapt to what we have and you will be successful. So you're asking and actually the book is fundamental if you're willing to listen to it, challenging how we have structured our practices and what we hold institutions accountable for. Because, you know, we often talk about Latino student success, which is not necessarily graduation.
Right.
And we've got to think about that differently. So I don't know that I have the answer, but I do know that in framing the focus that's, you know, are you more student ready rather than waiting for college ready students, all that reframing we're trying to do to create space, the opportunity there is to think about majors differently and not limit them. And frankly, the last thing I'll say is that we're dealing with lots of issues of dual enrollment. That's in early college high schools, that's cool and sexy. It creates even more of a challenge because if they come in with credits and they don't know what their major is, they're going to be stuck. And we're seeing that in large measure with a lot of students that think they're doing the right thing. They're getting the credits, they were going to finish in 3 years, and then they don't know what they're studying, and we are hampering them. And that's where I think the serving really needs to come out in our work.
Oh, I'm supposed to be facilitating, but I so want to answer that, but I won't. Do we have a question from Twitter?
Yes. This question comes from Frederick Smith on Twitter. As more campuses embrace HSI title, what shifts to values and leadership must we make?
I think there's an assumption that every campus embraces HSI status. I think there's a difference between exactly what Deborah said, Hispanic enrolling versus Hispanic serving. Some campuses nationally, I would say, reluctantly are moving into HSI status and haven't embraced what it means to serve a different population of students. And so I would say first we need to look at some of these institutions and how they're either modifying or thinking about changing policy and practice to serve the students that are coming to them now. And it's, for some of those institutions, it's simply a fact of changing demographics versus intentionally becoming Hispanic serving institutions.
Yeah. I mean, this is great question. I don't know this person, but I think they planted the right kind of question. You know what? The reality is that we've even seen a change. We went from 189 institutions when this was first identified to 472, with another 323 that are emerging. You know, in the next 10 years, we'll have 800 institutions that meet an enrollment criteria. So to the question about the practices and what needs to happen, we've got to make this transition. We need to deconstruct serving in a significant way, and we need to raise those standards so that there is intentionality. There are concrete things we know work for Latinos and other students, and we can't apologize for that. And we need to create the standards of expectation. I've seen a difference, 6 years ago, very few institutions owned being an HSI outside of going for federal funds. But let me tell you, 3 years ago, was it? UC Santa Barbara became an HSI. They took out ads. And I'm here, we get calls at least every other week from an institution, UC Irvine and others, that are close. I mean, UT Austin is close to hitting HSI. They got 50,000 students.
All right.
And the paradigm cannot just be enrolling. And so let's deconstruct serving in a significant way that puts the students into the serving and the definition of an HSI. And I'm not talking about legislative change. We can do this as institutional leaders. Yeah. And at CSU, if the majority of them are HSIs by enrollment, what an opportunity it is for the Cal State system to lead and raise the bar so that it's enrollment and retention and modeling with faculty and staff. That's got to be a big one.
Right.
And financial aid, we have to include serving in a meaningful way.
Wow. Well, question in the house. In the house. So here's a hand up here, hand over there.
Good afternoon.
Oh, sorry. I can't see you.
I can see you.
Yeah.
I have heard a lot of interesting things about proactive advising and about framing and about analytics, and that speaks probably more to the administrators in the room. I'm a faculty member from Sacramento. I'd like to hear what you think faculty should be doing more of or differently. The very last bit of the last statement said something about modeling faculty. I'm curious what that means. I also heard a little bit about policy that's informed by actual practice. I'd like that. I'd like to see more of it. I'd also like to see policy that's informed by shared governance as well as practice.
Good point.
That was a question.
Yeah.
Frame it. Reframe it.
I feel like I talked last time.
Well, so I come at this work from the framework that there's some magic happening inside the classroom, and what we need to do is actually fix how we're getting in the way outside the classroom. So that's part of our initial model, is that we actually think it's an organizational design problem, and it's the design of the administration, and it's how we're interacting with students outside the classroom. So we need to first triage that. There are lots of ways for faculty to be engaged in this kind of design work, in this kind of innovation work. Proactive advising would rely on the alerts of faculty, letting people know when students, so the way that proactive advising works in application at Georgia State is they are monitoring 800 different indicators that they have found based on historical data as being kind of the red alert, that if they'd only known, they could have stopped a student from dropping out. And many of those are within the domain of faculty. Many of those have to do with the first grade that a student gets in what will be their program of study. It's missing office hours. It's not coming to class. It's things like that. And so I would say there are opportunities there if this work is underway on your campus for faculty to play a meaningful role in helping to make sure that those alert systems are actually effective and useful and realistic for faculty to use. So anyway, the way that works is that every Monday they get a printout of every student who's about to get off track, and they intervene before the student even knows that they're off track with 3,000 advising hours that week. So the problem right now is that academic advising, most of the time we're spending a lot of our time with students who don't really need the advice. They need approval that they're making the right choice. But it's actually the students who are in the red who don't even know that they should be sitting down with us that we're missing. And so it's really, we're not using the resource of advisors as well as we could. And I think advisors are, if not the most critical, they're pretty darn close to the most critical role that there is at the institution. So I would say there's lots of opportunities for faculty to engage. I think that we're looking at it and that we think that we're getting in the way outside the classroom first, but you could be part of these conversations. We have teaching and learn. Let's be honest, there's a lot of things that we could be doing around the lecture and how we redesign it and how we're actually using the pedagogy that we know would actually be more effective in the classroom. And we think that those conversations can only be owned by faculty. And so really what it is our job to create deliberative and deliberative spaces where people can really work through those issues. And I know that if you have a teaching load that's really heavy and you're barely making it to office hours and you have way too much on your plate and then another committee on top of it, it's like, I understand that we have to design this work around the people who are doing it. And so that includes designing it around faculty, designing it around administrators, designing it around students. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but it was a darn good attempt.
Yeah. I would just add that I was the one who mentioned the modeling with faculty and staff, and what I mean by that is building on what Bridget had said, is that we have lots of good faculty that need to be given the latitude and investment of resources to serve their students well, and that isn't always happening. And we have seen time and again, faculty are the ones who touch students first and most, and if we don't find a way to do it there and have them model the success we want our students to see, it just doesn't happen in the ways that it can and should. So my comment was that. I think there are actually things we can measure about that as well. I also mean role modeling. I mean seeing more faculty of color. So, one thing, the great thing about being Excelencia in education, you don't have to apologize for calling out the question about serving Latinos, because it's out there, out front. Excelencia is a great cognate. You don't have to know Spanish, but everybody knows what you're talking about. So I do think that's part of modeling as well. And then I firmly believe that, I work in public policy. I've been complicit and guilty of a lot of the scaling issues, and I try not to lose sight of the student, but I do think that I've yet to see a really good policy that is imposed on practitioners that they don't buy into. And that's why I said that.
I just wanted to tag on around, especially the faculty diversity. I was on a panel 2 weeks ago in DC, and the president of Cal State Dominguez was also there. And one of the things that we saw in the data is that since 2003, the number of tenure line, first-time faculty hired for a tenure track position has increased by 96% for white faculty, and it's increased by 10% for black faculty. And so as we look at the faculty pipeline, we do need to really think about who we're hiring, and we have to be intentional about recruitment, especially as we look at, as we try to diversify our faculty. We talk about it in K-12 all the time on how 82% of teachers are white, but when you look at the data, it's not very different in higher ed as well. So we do need to diversify faculty and make those inroads because when you look at the data, we're actually going backwards.
We're good. How are we with time? Timekeepers? We're good? Can we have a question from Twitter, if there is one?
There's
all right.
Here.
Where's Chancellor?
Tim over here.
Oh, we definitely don't want to miss Chancellor. Chancellor?
There are consequences if not.
Oh, there we go. We can't see you all, but you all look really good. Thank you.
So thank you, all four of you. You've been complimentary and kind about the California State University's faculty, staff, students, and leadership, campus level, system level. But if you were king or queen for the day, you've given us a portfolio of diversifying faculty, the role of advisors, the role of, a large shopping list. So my question is going to pin you down. With what you know about us, what single thing do you think we could change or should change, and why?
Wow.
Bridget?
So that when your middle name is innovation, people expect you to pick something super fancy and there to be like AI and chatbots involved. But if I was queen for a day, I would say broadly in higher ed, but I know this is true here. I would require that every person who works on every CSU campus in any role has to take a class in the history of higher ed finance. Because I think that the segmentation and the fractionalization of higher ed is fundamentally one of our biggest problems. We create the illusion of progress by pitting ourselves against each other. It is faculty versus staff versus president versus student. My first interaction with higher ed, I was holding up a protest sign at a board meeting, but Tim was I think you were interim provost at the time, right? And so now here I am now in the position of often counseling students, and I just feel like the idea that there is anything but one side, and it's student success, and we're all on the same team, but people need to understand that a lot of the decisions that are being made, people are interpreting far too much into them, and they don't realize that our institutions are we are trying to get by. These are highly complex, multi-billion-dollar footprinted organizations that have a lot of pressure from every single angle coming at them, and we all need to be on the same team or we are going nowhere.
So I would say ditto, but I would give my own was that, you know what, I would probably require that every person in the CSU system shadow a student from the moment they're considering and they start the process to the time that they are in a classroom and work through the year. It is a very different perspective and humbling at best, but the resilience, the persistence, the commitment despite the hurdles, you'll see things you don't see in your office. And it will fundamentally change what and why you do what you do.
And I would stress that, I think that especially when you hear Sarah talk, how we support students, I think broadly, I would change how we support students broadly in terms of student financial aid. Wow. Tuition, in my opinion, is not enough, and creating free college models is also not necessarily the total answer. Tuition is just one component. We see, for example, in Tennessee, they have free college. 71% of white students who meet the requirement actually enroll, but it's only 46% of black students and Latino students. So we need to look at how we're supporting students, not in one aspect, only in tuition, but how we're supporting them in terms of food insecurity. When I was in school, I didn't know I was food insecure. I was just hungry all the time. And so, we need to look at how we're supporting students so that we ensure that we're meeting not just the one need around tuition, but all the needs students have in terms of getting a higher education.
Next, I don't want to go online if the executive vice chancellor wants to go next. So who do you guys have? All right, go for it. I can't see you. We're sorry.
Hi, it's Tom Enders from Cal State LA.
Hey, Tom.
When we talk about framing, I sometimes wonder where the framing and the data that's meant to inspire us or shame us into action isn't also inadvertently turning off our students. So sometimes I wonder, especially with our Latino students, that the national conversation about debt gets mixed up and the family conversation about debt, and I see far too many of our students working too much, and they don't understand that financial trade-off. Or when we show our graduation rates, we talked to students this summer in orientation, I love your idea, and we showed them the graduation dates. I said, you mean everybody doesn't graduate? I just wonder if some of our framing is losing inspiring them or helping them and their families make tough choices that might actually help. What are your thoughts on that?
So I would wonder why we're showing students graduation rate data. I was at an institution in Pennsylvania, and they were talking to a high ability group of low-income, underrepresented students. And the gentleman gets up and he gives that typical college speech, look to your left and look to your right. One of these people won't graduate. And so I talked to him after, and because his job was to support those students, and I told him, if one of those students doesn't graduate, you should lose your job because that is your job. And so what we should be saying is that we would like for all of you to graduate, not that only 37% or only 57% of the students here are graduating. And so I would say, we need to use data to inform practice. I know I'm at EdTrust, and we have done, what we call high achiever and low achievers and looked at that. But we should be using data to improve practice, not necessarily to shame. And so I would say if we're using that data, showing new students that only 47% of their classmates are graduating, we probably shouldn't be using that data. A funny story, I sat next to a faculty member from Cal State LA on my plane ride out yesterday. We had a great conversation about serving students, and I'll be on your campus later this month to speak to her education class.
Nice.
I guess I'll just say, this is where I focused. I talked about the framing part, right? Who is your audience? To this day, in the couple of years that I've been working in education, I don't know. I've yet to meet a college student who has picked an institution based on a graduation rate. To this day. But for public policy, that is the metric, right? And those of us even know when we unpack it what it is and isn't. So I don't know that it's a wrong or bad thing. It's not useful. If you know who you're serving, what are we giving our students to inspire them to know that it is possible, but also pragmatic enough to realize that this is no, cakewalk. When we give students, and we don't do this technically anymore, but we give them you can pick your classes. You get a buffet of options as opposed to we're going to find ways for you to complete. It becomes a challenge. For low-income first-gen students, for Latino students, we do tend to be slightly more loan-averse, but there are lots of reasons behind that. We've written about that. But some loans are good. And so you've got to create confianza. You've got to create trust. That student knows that you're there for them and that you're going to find ways to support them. That has to be the message. I'm not opposed to the data part, but I don't think that's appropriately helpful. That's not going to inspire a student. I mean, I think showing them students of people that look like them, that have walked their walk and talked their talk, that's what you need to inspire them. And then, right after that, you connect them to the advisors and the faculty members that are going to ensure their success. That's got to be orientation for me.
You know that slide I showed that was, hey guys, come see how good I look? Like, multiply that times 7,000 institutions, and that's what students are facing when they're trying to make a really complicated decision that they think is the most important decision of their life. I'm a big sister with big brothers, big sisters, and my little, we're trying to figure out where she's going to college. And I'm supposed to be an expert in this field, and there is nothing more humbling because the BS is so high. And and it's really problematic. So I would say we need to own that we are part of a broader narrative, that we need to actually stop getting in our own way. And the whole blasting about how great we are is not helpful. I would say in terms of shaming, so I have a personal policy within the UIA. I don't ever do any comparative data for my campuses unless it's actually helpful. And I don't ever publicly release any of that. So it's only privately with my board. I show one slide. It's usually about the delta in outcomes between race and income on their campus and where they're making progress. I believe that there is a culture of scarcity in higher ed. Everything you do is not enough. You are plenty shamed. That is not an effective tool. Jealousy is the most powerful force in higher education, however. And so what people don't realize is when I'm out talking about the UIA and trying to get them headlines, I am turning the heads of the presidents and chancellors in my direction because we are trying to make student success sexy. And so I would say highlighting great behavior and showing, giving people praise is a far more effective tool. And we definitely need to own the noise that we are creating for students and families, and we need to be much more thoughtful about that.
Ooh, told you this was a great panel. We have, I don't know what that says, but I see you're holding it. I'm sorry, I'm trying to be.
And now.
How many minutes?
It says end now.
End now. Okay. Let's give our panelists another round of applause. You guys can go.
Okay.
Yeah, you go. Not only are we were together earlier while you guys were in the keynote and doing some other things. They're just a great, great group of people. I said I've known Deborah the longest, but the other two, Bridget, I feel like she's a sister from another mister. I mean, just a real real connected folks. And can you guys give yourselves a round of applause and thank you for this? Really, really good. I'd like to thank all of you who are live streaming with us, and thank you for your questions. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for all the tweets that went out regarding this. This has been really phenomenal, and we affectionately called it a Tim Talk. So that's where, so thanks for coming to our first ever Tim Talk. We're going to have lots more of these as we go along. But without any further ado, to close us out, I'd like to invite to the stage the Executive Vice Chancellor, whose page is just blue, Dr. Lauren Blanchard.
When you're gone, I lose faith, I lose everything I have found. Heartstrings, violence, that's what I hear when you're
So good afternoon. Over the course of this day, we have had the great pleasure of hearing from a number of speakers presenting on a range of topics. Dr. Sarah Goldrick-Rabb spoke about college affordability. Dr. Will Del Pilar presented on closing equity gaps. Dr. Deborah, or Ms. Deborah Santiago on ensuring the success of Latino students, and Dr. Bridget Burns on the importance and the value of innovation. Their questions and their presentations collectively beg the question of what bridges all of these important topics. After all, each of these topics is significant enough to warrant a symposium unto itself. But taken together, we believe wholeheartedly that the presentations today represent a national movement in higher education that requires us to inspect, to question, and to re-examine the relationship between institutional practices and student success. This is a moment to rethink, if you will, business as usual. Or as our Chancellor, Chancellor White, commonly refers to it as, we always do it in this way-isms. In the never-ending quest to innovate and to improve and to better serve students. It is in this national context that the California State University is undertaking Graduation Initiative 2025. The actions we are taking on campuses and certainly across the system are critical, but I want to emphasize that they're really not new, nor are the results of just guessing at ways to support students, hoping that we get lucky and that one of these strategies we implement will hit the bullseye. Instead, the work that we are doing is truly based in a growing body of evidence nationally on research and on student outcomes data. For example, there is growing evidence that microgrants, small sums of dollars available when students first find themselves in challenging times, that they are effective in retaining low-income students who have trouble covering the cost of attendance, or even the cost of small fees such as a parking ticket or a library fine or graduating filing fee. These grants, often in small amounts of no more than $150, have been shown to significantly boost graduation, retention, amongst low-income first-generation students. It is because of this research that our campuses at CSU have begun implementing their own micro-grant programs to benefit the CSU students. Consider also, if you will, our policy changes designed to ensure that all CSU students have the opportunity to begin earning college credit their first day that they set foot on campus as a college student, while receiving needed academic support in order for them to be successful. Again, these are bold changes that will have a measurable impact on student success, but it's not new. As early as 2012, several states have transitioned to alternative instructional approaches in mathematics. For example, at Fairmont State University in West Virginia, a public comprehensive university of 4,000 students, of which half receive Pell Grants, the number of students completing entry-level mathematics courses increased from 28% to 82% after the university moved to providing co-requisite-based mathematics courses. Similarly, pass rates in English at West Liberty University, also in West Virginia, moved from 46% to 91%. These are not isolated examples. We see a similar story in Connecticut, where legislation required colleges to redesign developmental education, and in Georgia, which took similar action in 2013, and in all cases, academic rigor and quality were never compromised. Now, this is usually the point in my conversation when I mention this to others, that people grow a little skeptical and they start pointing out that we're not exactly Connecticut, we're not exactly Georgia, we are not West Virginia. And they're right, we're not. But who we are is California State University, the nation's largest and most affordable four-year public education system. We educate the most ethnically, economically, and academically diverse university student body in the United States. Our campuses rank highest in the nation for value, return on investment, and social mobility. When the CSU takes action, the state listens, the nation listens, and everyone takes notice. The CSU has long been a national leader in higher education, and we must continue leading. Continue leading for our state of California, which will need more college graduates who are well prepared to fill the jobs of tomorrow. Continue leading for our faculty and staff and alumni whose hard work, passion, and dedication have shaped the CSU into the leader of higher education it is today. And continue leading for our students, those currently enrolled and those to come. At a CSU Board of Trustees meeting, and I know she doesn't know that I'm about to say this, but our former student trustee and current president of the California Student Association, Maggie White, described our Graduation Initiative 2025 by saying, and I quote, "It is not about changing our students, it's about changing how we serve our students to be more successful." Maggie, I want to thank you for that line. I use it quite often. And it is. And Maggie is absolutely right. No two students at CSU are alike. Each has their own strengths and faces their own respective challenges. Each of these students, indeed our students, deserve the opportunity to earn a degree according to their own personal goals. You've heard me state this time and time again. If our students meet the requirements and are admitted to the CSU, we have a collective responsibility to do everything within our power to ensure that they graduate and that they are prepared for future success. And their chances of success should never be determined by their household income, should never be determined by ethnicity, and never be determined by their status. It is this core belief that truly is driving the national movement. It is what each of the speakers today reflected in their remarks, and it is what CSU's Graduation Initiative 2025 is all about. It is also what I hope that you will continue to talk about. The exchanges that you've had and heard today and will have tomorrow represent really a new direction for higher education. The colleagues who are joining us from across the nation are on the cutting edge, conducting exciting research and advancing innovations, all in the name of more effectively serving our students. It is our hope that what you heard today through our presentations will spark conversations that will continue during the networking reception that's about to start momentarily, but will also continue back on your campuses. The ideas expressed today are indeed worthy of consideration, but for our students to benefit from them, we must be able to convert them from ideas to action across the CSU. Perhaps the most salient theme throughout the day, for me at least, is that improving student success really does require change. In fact, it demands change. It won't be easy, but as you've heard many of the presenters state today, change worth making never is. It is in the spirit of collaboration and of innovation, indeed the spirit of Californians, that has made the CSU the great institution that it is today. And it is these qualities that will allow us to achieve our student success goals. So for now, this concludes my remarks, and I hope that you all will join me in continuing our conversations that were sparked today during the reception that will be held out on the terrace. And I hope as well that you will continue to enjoy not only learning a whole lot more in terms of what's happening on the national level, but more importantly, what we can take and learn and move directly into action into CSU. I want to thank you for joining us today, and I certainly hope that you enjoy your evening.